Thank you, Tim. A whole lot going on here, and it's so great to be able to join with you at this early service. It's the first time that I'm here for 9:30. I'm not even normally in this building by 9:30 on a Sunday, so it's really good to be here today. Haven't got very long, so we're going to jump straight into our Bible reading for today, which is from Luke chapter 24, starting at verse 33. And today we're following on directly after Tim's talk from last week, as we return to Easter Sunday, as Cleopas and his friend head off immediately to Jerusalem to visit the disciples. So this is Luke 24, starting at verse 33. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them, assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking that they saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." I don't know about you, I have recently discovered, once again, my love for the James Bond films. They've all gone back onto Amazon Prime, and I'm sure many of you here will have seen the James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me. It's one of my favourites, and up to that point in the James Bond film series, it's always been a little bit out there, but at least the stories had been vaguely believable. This film, though, well, this is not vaguely believable at all. From the moment that James Bond jumps off a cliff at the start and pulls the now infamous Union flag parachute out, you know that you're in for a ride. And as the story progresses, I find myself grinning at the various different plans that happen to start a nuclear war and then rebuild civilization underwater, only for the hero, James Bond, once again to save the day. Now, right now, you might be wondering why on earth I'm talking about James Bond. Well, firstly, I love it, so I'm sharing that with you. But secondly, it's because of this beautiful car, the 1976 Lotus Esprit. In the film, there's a scene about halfway through where James and his female friend, as is tradition, are driving this car, and naturally, he's being chased by someone in a helicopter who wants to kill him. You know, the usual James Bond plot. He ends up driving faster and faster, trying to get away from the helicopter, and after around 4 minutes of frantic action, he drives full speed onto a pier with no intention of slowing down. Right as he's about to jump off the edge of the cliff in this car, James Bond turns to his female passenger and says, "Can you swim?" Except in a much better voice than I just did. And she, in turn, pulls this face at that comment. Well, I'm sure you know what happens next. Splat. James Bond drives off into the pier and into the sea. And I want you to put yourself into the position of that woman this morning. Imagine the shock of the car chase, the bullets raining down, and now you've just driven off the end of a pier. That face says it all. But I'm fairly sure at that moment she is convinced that she is about to drown in this lovely Lotus Esprit. And watching it for the first time, you're probably thinking the same thing. You're probably thinking, oh no, James Bond is going to die. Well, maybe some of you that are switched on would know he's not going to die. We're only an hour into the film and it's James Bond, so that's obviously not going to happen. But to be honest, the peril is there, and in that moment, all you can think about is, this is going to end in disaster. There is absolutely no hope. However, this car is different from most other cars. Can anyone here say, what is different about this car? It turns into a submarine. This car doesn't simply work on dry land. It can be transformed so that it works underwater. Hopefully there's an image there of it. Oh, it's just amazing. Now, this car is equally at home on the land as it is under the water as a submarine. And although the girl's reaction to being underwater in the car was at first fear, once she accepted that the car was different from all the other cars that she'd been in up till that point, her fear very quickly left her. She realized that she was not going to drown alongside James Bond, and that in fact, everything was going to be all right. We can often become afraid and frightened, can't we, when we come across something that's outside of our experience, which we cannot begin to understand or comprehend. And in today's passage, it's pretty clear to me that the disciples that we see here were absolutely terrified before Jesus appeared to them, and they only became more frightened when Jesus actually appeared amongst them, not long after he'd been raised from the dead. Now, in the later service today, we're going to think a bit more about all of the different emotions that we see in this story, but I just want to very quickly focus on how Jesus quells the fear in the disciples today. Much like how James Bond's friend's fear completely disappeared as she realized the car was, in fact, a submarine, we too can experience that same feeling of relief when we realize what it means for us as Christians living in the light of Jesus' resurrection as he appears to the disciples. You see, the response of the disciples, that of fear and trepidation, I believe is somewhat justified here. I mean, just a couple of days ago, they have seen Jesus, the man that they've been following for the past few years, killed at the hands of the Romans. And even though in the back of their minds, they're probably there thinking, oh, we know what the scriptures say, the reality is the gruesome scenes that happened at Calvary were the only thing that was in their minds at that point. At the start of today's passage, we see the disciples gathered together, likely in an upper room, and the only thing that's on their minds at that point will have been the questions like, what are we going to do since Jesus isn't here? What are we going to do since he's not there to guide us in this situation? And you know what the funny thing is? We do the same thing, don't we? So many times we act in exactly the same way as the disciples did. We draw up all of these plans in our minds just in case God won't be leading us in the direction that we need to go. And it's easy to start going down the line of asking Jesus if he's even there with us in these moments we find ourselves in. We trouble ourselves with senseless planning and thinking when really what we need to do is step back and listen to the words that Jesus said, the first words Jesus said to the disciples after he rose from the dead. He appeared to them and he said, "Peace be with you. Why are you troubled? And why did doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself." And this is the message of Easter for all of us. Jesus coming back from the dead to meet us in the situations and circumstances that we find ourselves in, greeting us with these amazing words, "Peace be with you." And the same peace that was offered to the disciples is the same peace that we can experience today. And if we truly know what it's like to know the peace that Christ can offer us, then it's out of that we can follow up on his charge to us to go into all the nations and preach the good news of his return. Even if we have found ourselves turning away from Jesus, and even if we've denied him like the disciples did in the hours before his death, Jesus wants us to know that just like he said to the disciples, that we are forgiven and that he offers us his peace. And it's through this forgiveness and through this peace that we can go and live our lives to the full, commissioned to go and preach to all the nations. I can remember standing here a few years ago preaching on Easter Sunday about how the resurrection changes everything. And please don't get me wrong, I still completely believe that to be the case. But I think upon studying this passage, I think this interaction takes things even further. Because it'd be no good if Jesus had simply been resurrected but never came and interacted with us, never created this open relationship that we have with him, if he never offered us this peace that goes far beyond our understanding. And we see this living example all through the Bible, don't we? When Jesus comes and he calms the storms in our lives. And it's been amazing through the pandemic to hear lots of different people come and share about how Jesus has spoken to them through that period of time and how the stories we read in the Bible have touched them and provided them with comfort and peace over this difficult period. But I think this moment here that we see really is the final moment that for each of us needs to be the foundation and rock that our faith is built on. Much like James Bond's friend in the example from earlier, there are going to be times when things get tough, when we can't always wrap our head around what is going on. And the Bible never promises that life will be easy for us. And perhaps there have been times even recently when you've found yourself not being sure whether God would come and help you out of the situation that you find yourself in. But I want to leave you with the promise today that we've read and that we hear about. And we need to trust that he will. Because that's why he went to the cross. That's why he sacrificed his life, so that you and I could be reconciled to God and have the power of heaven to help us in any and every circumstance we find ourselves in. Peace be with you. Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds? Jesus is alive. Let's live out our lives in the light of this amazing truth.